It is Saturday, November 2nd, 2024. We're less than 3 days from the official election day and the most important election in world history, Tuesday, November 5th. And this is an emergency Saturday election alert update. All right. I've known Patrick Byrne a long time. He's a very respected journalist and also very successful businessman. And he put out a viral news alert this morning where he basically laid out the facts from his sources that the Democratic Party, run by Obama, is measuring the drapes at the White House and has told all their people, don't worry about all this Trump landslide or him ahead in the polls. It doesn't matter, he will lose. And people really got upset by this video. And people ask me, is it accurate? Well, not only do I know that Patrick has a great record of accuracy for decades, I don't need to believe Patrick Byrne. All the signs are there, all the evidence is there, and Pelosi, back in 2020, right before the election, said the same stuff publicly, that it doesn't matter whether it looks like he wins, it's a red mirage, we will have the votes after Election Day. And then we've seen similar statements since then by key Democrat Party operatives. So, yes, they are telling their people that she is invincible, and it doesn't matter what. They're not going to accept the certification of Trump. Raskin has said that, who ran the Jan 6 committee. And they charged people for even talking like that, but now he's openly saying it. So a lot goes into that. Now, the big question I'm sure you have is, can it be stopped? Or why are they telling their people that it's a sure thing? Well, Hillary told her people that as well in 2016. They said she had a 98% chance of winning the New York Times. She had Newsweek interviews that were already printed up, Madam President. You remember all that. So part of that is their arrogance with their own people to make them not break ranks and not panic. That said, they have every intention of stealing it. And I'll walk through the evidence that's currently taking place. The question is, will they be successful? But they already said he was a Russian agent, had all the fake investigations, tried to remove him by impeachment twice, had all the criminal indictments and the lawfare and the fake conviction, and then the 2 assassination attempts and all the rest of it. So you think they're going to stop there? And the answer is no. And then if you look at past election irregularities and just open fraud, 2020 was massive. And they just gaslit folks, said there was no evidence of it, but then later with the lawsuits and evidence came out that it was worse than what Trump and myself and others had said. It was exactly what we said, just worse. In Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, the list goes on, all the battlegrounds. And now they've done everything they did in 2020, but much worse, much more intense. Because they know that Trump is coming after the deep state. He is planning on firing them. He's got a real coalition of experts now that are ready to come in, and he is way more informed than he was back then. So, yeah, we have a very dangerous enemy. And as Patrick said, only a massive super landslide can override them. It won't look like a landslide because, again, the fraud's like a seawall, a blue seawall, and the wave comes in, and if it's not big enough to get over the seawall, at least some of it, then he loses. So, again, that's a big wave, but can it make it past the wall? You've got to have a wave so big, and it goes in the statistics and the numbers, and they've only got so many dead people and so many fraudulent people on the voter rolls, and each state's been looked at. But on average, they've got 7 to 10% fraud baked in. And if Trump can win in battlegrounds by more than 10%, he will win. It's simple. Again, look at Michigan. Remember, they denied 4 years ago what Republicans said, and they sued and proved it. And then they said this year, well, we're still keeping them on there. 500,000 plus people that have never been on the voter rolls, never voted. Most of them are fake names. That's come out in the news. But they stay on, the state said. Well, how do you have 500,000? So the only way they can stop a landslide, and then it's so obvious, is if they produce so many digital fake votes or so many fake ballots with fake names or dead people's names on it that it's more voters than there are on the voter rolls when you add up the Republican and Democrat votes. But in the case of Michigan, they actually have done that. So when I say a total tsunami is unstoppable, actually it isn't. It's just then you're going to have it right out in the open that more people voted. It's okay. Here's the French bulldog. Here it is. Here, it's okay. Here's our little sweetie. Here, take Tina. We interrupt these messages with the French bulldog. You're going to have the spectacle in Michigan and other states of more people voting than are on the voter rolls. And by the hundreds of thousands, it's not just Michigan. So even if they steal it, it's going to be so glaring to everyone that this is going on. And now they're admitting that illegals are voting in at least 10 states. And the Supreme Court struck it down in Virginia, but it's still going on in at least 9 that were battlegrounds where it got challenged by Republicans and the states said no and the federal judges said no, they stay on. That's the lower circuit courts. And then you've got also the databases that are coming out in Arizona and other areas where it is illegal aliens that voted in the last 2 elections. So those are just the ones that got checked. And so it's taken 4 years of lawsuits by the Republicans just to get up to the point where they're getting the cases and winning them and going, yeah, it was illegal aliens voted in places like Arizona. It's just incredible. So even if they do steal this, it's a Pyrrhic victory because it totally discredits them. That said, here's the rest of the story. You see all the pre-programming everywhere that Republicans are going to be violent and they're going to attack and they're going to kill people. And clearly that's how they're going to legitimize the theft of this election. Is just like 2020 was something like January 6th, but much bigger. And even if we don't walk into a trap where 1 million of us show up in D.C. and federal provocateurs attack police and the crowd gets mad and joins in, and then they open the doors and people walk in and they charge old ladies for walking between velvet ropes and call it the most deadly attack in world history. I mean, somebody could get a hangnail in this disputed election and they'll call it the worst thing in history. Worst thing since Pearl Harbor or whatever. But they've definitely got false flags in the works because they've been preparing the ground for that and saying it's imminent. While they separately say if somehow Trump does override all the fraud, that they're going to not certify him and have civil war conditions and armed uprisings, as Carville said, because he's coming to get the black men, and just the crazy gaslighting of him. Like, if Cheney wants to go fight, in war, that's fine, but we shouldn't send troops to get killed and face those guns. I mean, that's the oldest saying in the world. These warmongers ought to go fight the war and, face the guns themselves. That's not a threat saying they should go fight the war. But you're going to just see a lot more of that to the 10th level. So everybody's asking me, is the steal going to be successful? And that's the question. So we move past the fact, is there a steal going on? And yes, there's an attempted robbery of this election. And if you study history, that goes on in other countries all the time. People get caught doing it all the time. They admit that there's been stolen elections here in the U.S. before. Some of the most beloved presidents reportedly stole their way into office, like what happened in Illinois with JFK. So America has been through this before. But generally, it was one political party stealing the election from the other, and by extension, stealing it from the population. But now it's cut and dry. Globalist establishment, super unpopular against the populist population that Trump represents. And so the public is not going to take this lying down politically. This will only cause a bigger awakening and more state laws and more people researching and finding out how this was stolen from them. That's why the system needs to sew it up now with some big terror attacks blamed on Trump supporters that they've said are imminent with no evidence. That's because they're going to stage them, obviously. Think the governor staged Whitmer kidnapping, but 1,000 times bigger. And so, yeah, we're in for some very, very rough territory here. But at the end of the day, we have the initiative. Humanity's waking up. It's a very exciting time to be alive. So I see the election, and already half the people in the country, or a little bit more, have already voted. So we're already deep into the election. But I see the election going really 3 different ways right now. Well, it could be 4, but the first one's the sneak attack, and I'm not predicting that's going to happen, but they've telegraphed that they're trying this. They could steal Texas with the second most electoral votes, and they've got everybody looking for a big, long, drawn-out thing with weeks and weeks and weeks of battleground states with all these crazy ballots and the rest of it coming in late. And then they take over Texas, they steal Texas, and then boom, the other battleground states don't matter anymore, and so all the fraud there never gets investigated because it doesn't matter, they flip Texas. And they can even give some of those states to Trump because it won't matter, she won because of Texas. Not saying that's going to happen, but that's the dark horse upset wild card. The way most of their pre-positioning has gone, the Democratic Party, is to drag it out. Georgia just said today they're not going to follow state law, and they're going to drag it out weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. All these magic ballots show up. The Supreme Court of, as you know, Nevada last week ruled on Monday that they can take ballots 3 days after, non-postmarked, so no proof they were ever in anybody's hands. So that's perfect for fraud to produce whatever amount is needed to beat Trump there. We already talked about Michigan. I mean, Pennsylvania, all the conservative areas. We have one machine and it's broken. And all the leftist areas, there's no lines, 50 machines. So there's a lot of different things that are going on here. And so most of the evidence is leaning towards that it becomes contested, it drags out like they did in 2020, and then they're able to stuff the ballot boxes in the aftermath that way. And then, of course, there is the other scenario, and that Trump has such a landslide, which we know this is a huge turnout, and it would be a landslide if there wasn't fraud, and he overpowers it, and then he's declared the winner maybe that night, the next day, 2 or 3 days later, and then the Democrats start saying, well, he's a felon, he's been convicted, we're not going to certify. And that comes down to, have they been able to take the House of Representatives where they would then be able to block that? And they've said they would. And then that's where the Supreme Court comes in. And the Supreme Court could also come in if Kamala magically wins Texas, and there's big questions there. But generally, courts during an actual election aren't going to get into it at that point. They're going to come back years later and then have rulings that mitigate it in the future. So that's basically where we are. Patrick Byrne is absolutely right. If you haven't voted and your family hasn't voted, or your neighbors haven't voted, or perfect strangers you run into haven't voted, get your asses out there and vote. Even if you're not registered, you can get a provisional ballot, and sometimes those get counted. But this is a big deal. And if we do lose, it won't be because evil fought so hard. It will be because the 32 million Christians that have been surveyed say Trump's not perfect, so they're not going to vote. And so not voting for Trump because he's not Jesus set down on earth for you, because you're a Pharisee that Christ talked about, then you've basically voted for the party of Satan, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and you're the devil's secret weapon. So if we do lose this election, it's not because of evil. Evil's always going to be evil. It's because good men and women did nothing. That's what Thomas Jefferson said. He was asked, why does tyranny prevail in history? And he said, because good men do nothing. And so that's where we're at. Because, I'm not going to touch that. It's dirty. It's politics. I'm above that. Well, it's not above you. And so all of the evil, transgender targeting our kids, the open borders, the World War III, the devaluation of the dollar, the inflation, all of it. You've got all these Christians hiding in their synagogues of Satan, their churches of Satan, their places of the devil, where you go hear a feel-good preacher and you hide from the world, and everything's fine. You're supposed to be the light of the world. You're supposed to be out there engaging evil. Christ didn't hang around with the fake Pharisees that said how holy they were and how perfect they were. He hung around with tax collectors and prostitutes and robbers and murderers. But he could get them to admit they've been wrong and come to God. Couldn't get a Pharisee because they're already basically God, aren't they? Like the fake Christians in this country. So that's between you and God. I'm not going to rebuke you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm just going to say that if we lose this, it's your fault.